For 4 months, my daughter locked her bedroom door every night at exactly 10 p.m. in the house we had shared since my wife passed away. "Dad, your snoring is too loud. Please sleep downstairs," she said with a tired smile. I believed her. Then one night, after weeks of hearing strange sounds behind that locked door, I quietly slipped into the narrow space behind an old bookshelf and waited. At 11:47 p.m., a cold voice broke the silence. What I heard next made me realize I had been living inside a trap planned long before I noticed it. This is a heavy story. Take a breath with me before we begin. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever experienced betrayal from someone you deeply trusted? Yes or no? Your perspective might help someone else today. Just a note, certain details are fictionalized for storytelling. What matters most is the lesson it carries. The deadbolt clicked at exactly 10 o'clock on the 14th of January 2025. And for the first time in the 30 years I'd lived in this house, I heard a sound that didn't belong. I was 68 years old that January evening, sitting in my living room with a book I'd been meaning to finish for months. Dinner had been quiet, just Celeste and me at the kitchen table the way it had been for the past 7 years since Helen died. My daughter had seemed tired picking at her chicken and asking polite questions about the manufacturing business I'd founded 4 decades ago. Nothing unusual, nothing wrong, but that sound. I looked up from my book, listening. Celeste's footsteps had climbed the stairs at her usual pace, neither hurried nor hesitant. Her bedroom door closed with its familiar soft thud. Then came the sound I'd never heard before, metal sliding into metal, solid and deliberate. A deadbolt. I sat frozen. The book still open in my hands, staring at the staircase as if it might explain itself. In 30 years, no one had ever locked an interior door in this house. Helen and I had raised Celeste with open doors, with trust, with the kind of family intimacy that didn't require barriers. Even after Helen passed, even after it became just the two of us rattling around in these rooms, we'd never needed locks between us. I considered going upstairs, knocking, asking if everything was all right. But Celeste was 39 years old, a senior analyst at a California-based investment fund, recently promoted to a position that had her on conference calls with the West Coast until midnight some nights. She was tired, stressed. Adults were entitled to their privacy, weren't they? Maybe she'd installed the lock weeks ago and I simply hadn't noticed. Maybe it had always been there, and my aging ears were only now picking up the sound. I returned to my book, reading the same paragraph 3 times without absorbing a single word. "She must be exhausted," I said to the empty room. "The promotion has been hard on her." The house settled into its nighttime quiet, the furnace cycling on the old wood beams, contracting in the January cold. All the familiar sounds of a home I'd lived in longer than my daughter had been alive. I told myself the deadbolt was nothing. Just Celeste being tired. Just me being a worried father with too much time to notice things that didn't matter. I didn't think much of it that night. That was my first mistake. The next morning, Celeste was already at the kitchen table when I came downstairs. She sat with her hands wrapped around a coffee mug, her eyes genuinely red, the kind of exhaustion that can't be faked. I'd seen that look before on Helen during the bad months before the diagnosis, on myself in the mirror after the funeral. "Dad," Celeste said as I poured my own coffee, "I need to talk to you about something." I sat down across from her, suddenly alert. The tone was wrong. Too careful. Too gentle. "Your snoring has gotten much louder lately," she continued, meeting my eyes with what looked like genuine concern. "I know you can't help it, but I've been lying awake for hours every night. The fun promotion, the stress, the deadlines. I can't keep functioning on 3 hours of sleep." I stared at her, processing. Snoring. She'd never mentioned it before. "I had no idea I was keeping you awake," I said. "Why didn't you say something sooner? I didn't want to hurt your feelings." She reached across the table, placing her hand over mine. Her fingers were warm from the coffee mug. "But last night, I finally just..." I needed one night of silence. That's why I locked the door. I'm sorry if it seemed strange. The deadbolt. Of course. Not some mystery or problem, just a daughter desperate for sleep, trying to muffle her father's snoring. I feel terrible, I said. You should have told me weeks ago. I'm telling you now. Her eyes were so tired. Dad, I was thinking, maybe temporarily, just until my biological clock stabilizes and I can handle the noise again. Would you mind sleeping in the living room? The sofa pulls out into a bed. It would just be for a little while until I catch up on rest. I looked at my daughter, this woman I'd raised alone after Helen died, who'd driven home from California to keep me company, because she knew I got lonely in this big house, who'd taken a remote work arrangement so she could stay in Ohio near her aging father. She'd given up so much for me, and I couldn't give her a few nights of quiet sleep. Of course I'll take the living room, I said immediately. Whatever you need. I should have thought of it myself. The relief on her face looked absolutely genuine. She squeezed my hand, smiled, and for a moment, she was 7 years old, again gap-toothed, and grateful when I'd agreed to read her one more bedtime story. Thank you, she said. I promise it's just temporary. A few weeks, maybe a month. Just until I get through this rough patch at work. Take as long as you need, I told her. Your health is more important than my pride. We finished breakfast, talking about other things, her latest project analyzing portfolio risks, my plans to finally organize the garage, the January weather that kept threatening snow but never delivering. Normal conversation, father and daughter. Nothing wrong. That evening, I carried my pillows and an extra blanket down to the living room. The sofa bed was more comfortable than I'd expected, the mattress firm enough for my aging back. I arranged everything carefully, telling myself this was temporary, that I was being a good father, that helping Celeste rest was the least I could do after everything she'd done for me. I packed my things that evening, believing I was being a good father. I didn't know I was walking into a trap. Upstairs, at exactly 10 o'clock, I heard the deadbolt slide into place again. This time, I barely noticed it. I was already adjusting, already accepting, already trusting the explanation I'd been given. I lay in the living room that first night, listening to the house settle around me, convincing myself that this temporary arrangement would help my daughter recover from her work stress. The deadbolt meant nothing. The locked door was just practicality. Celeste needed sleep, and I needed to be the kind of father who put his daughter's needs first. I didn't know that deadbolt click was the first sound in a 7-month symphony of betrayal. The living room became my bedroom faster than I'd expected. Every morning for 3 weeks, Celeste left a small blue box next to my coffee cup, and every morning I swallowed what she told me would keep me healthy. Dad, you have to take these regularly, she said the first time the box appeared sitting across from me, with her laptop already open for her morning California call. I've researched this thoroughly for men your age. Vitamin D, omega-3, CoQ10, you're not getting enough from diet alone. I picked up the box. 7 compartments, each labeled with the day of the week, each filled with 4 or 5 different pills. You did all this research, I asked. Of course. She squeezed my hand. I worry about you, Dad. Living alone all those years after Mom died, not eating right. Let me take care of you the way you took care of me. She was always so thoughtful, took after her mother that way. I took the pills. Monday's compartment. 5 capsules washed down with coffee Celeste had already brewed exactly the way I liked it. Thank you, honey, I said. Every day, she reminded me, it only works if you're consistent. So I was consistent. Every morning, the blue box appeared. Every morning, I emptied that day's compartment. It became as automatic as brushing my teeth, as unremarkable as the deadbolt I heard slide into place every night at exactly 10 o'clock. 2 weeks in, I started noticing the fatigue. Nothing dramatic. Just mornings that felt heavier than they used to, a fog that didn't quite lift even after 2 cups of coffee. I'd sit at the kitchen table reading the newspaper, and the words would swim slightly, requiring extra focus. By afternoon, I felt clearer, almost normal. But those morning hours, the time I'd always been sharpest, felt like thinking through cotton. I'm just slowing down, I think. I told Celeste one morning when she found me still at the table at 9:30, newspaper unread. 68 catches up with you. You should see a doctor, she said. Get your levels checked. Maybe we need to adjust your supplements. No, it's nothing. Just old age doing what old age does. Looking back, I can see exactly when my body started changing. But at the time, I blamed age instead of the blue box. The deadbolt became a sound. I measured my evenings by 10 o'clock. Every night. Metal sliding into metal with that same solid click. I'd hear Celeste's footsteps climb the stairs, her bedroom door close, then the lock engage. Routine. Pattern. The rhythm of our new normal. But 3 weeks in, I started wondering why. Not the snoring, I'd accepted that explanation. But why a deadbolt? Why lock an interior door in a house where only 2 people lived, where I'd already moved to a different floor? One evening, I stood outside her bedroom door at 10:15 after I'd heard the lock engage. I knocked softly. "Honey," I called through the wood. "Why do you need to lock the door every night?" Silence. Then her voice, slightly muffled. "It makes me feel more secure, Dad. Helps me relax knowing it's locked." I stood there processing. Secure from what? From me. "Okay," I said finally. "I just wanted to make sure you're all right." "I'm fine, just tired. Good night." I went back downstairs, that explanation sitting uneasily in my chest. But I told myself it was reasonable. Women felt differently about security. Helen had always wanted the front door double locked at night. This was probably similar. A comfort thing. A week later, I asked again. Same time, same place, me in the upstairs hallway, her voice through the locked door. "I've been moving around in my sleep," she said when I asked why the lock was necessary. "The lock keeps me from wandering outside and hurting myself." I stood very still, my hand still raised from knocking. "Sleepwalking," I said. "You never mentioned that before." "It's gotten worse lately. The work stress, probably. I'm worried I might walk right out the front door one night if I don't lock myself in." 2 different answers. Security and relaxation the first time. Sleepwalking prevention the second time. Both delivered with the same concerned, slightly tired tone. Both perfectly reasonable on their own. But they didn't match. I stood in that hallway holding 2 different answers to the same question, and I chose to believe I was the one remembering wrong. "You should see a doctor about that," I said through the door. "I will," she promised. "Good night, Dad." I walked back downstairs, my mind turning over those 2 explanations like puzzle pieces that didn't quite fit. Security. Sleepwalking. Relaxation. Wandering. Which one was true, or were they both true, just different aspects of the same anxiety? I lay on the sofa bed that night staring at the ceiling, feeling that cold unease settle in my stomach. The kind of feeling that whispered something was wrong. Something didn't add up, something I should investigate. But I didn't want to investigate. I didn't want to doubt my daughter. I didn't want to be the kind of father who interrogated and suspected instead of trusted and supported. So I told myself I was overthinking it. That grief over Helen still made me see problems where there were none. That my daughter, who researched vitamins for my health and worried about sleepwalking, couldn't possibly be lying to me. 2 different explanations for one locked door. I noticed the inconsistency that night, felt it settle cold in my stomach like truth I didn't want to swallow. But I chose to doubt myself instead of her, chose to believe that love and logic could coexist with contradictions, chose to stop asking questions that might damage the fragile trust between a widowed father and his only child. I didn't know that February would bring a performance designed to make me stop asking questions entirely. February came, and I stopped asking questions about the contradictions. I'd convinced myself I was being paranoid, that a good father would trust his daughter's explanations, even when they didn't quite line up. Then the footsteps woke me at 2 in the morning, and when I stepped into the hallway, my daughter was standing there with her eyes closed. I'd been sleeping fitfully on the sofa bed, the way I had every night since moving to the living room. The house was completely dark, except for the silver moonlight coming through the upstairs hallway window. I heard the footsteps, first soft, deliberate moving across the floor above me, then silence, then movement again. I got up, my heart already accelerating, with that particular fear parents never outgrow, the one that says something is wrong with your child. I climbed the stairs as quietly as I could, and there she was. Celeste stood motionless in the middle of the hallway, wearing pale blue pajamas, her bare feet on the hardwood floor. Her eyes were closed. Not squeezed shut like someone pretending, but gently closed the way they looked when she slept. Her breathing was even and deep. One hand touched the wall beside her, fingers splayed against the wallpaper like someone navigating in darkness. She looked exactly like someone sleepwalking. "Celeste," I said softly, approaching her carefully. "Honey, wake up." She didn't respond, didn't open her eyes, didn't acknowledge my voice at all. She just stood there, breathing, her hand against the wall, her face peaceful and empty. I'd read about sleepwalking. Never wake them abruptly. Guide them gently back to bed. Keep them safe. "Easy now," I murmured, taking her arm gently. "Back to bed. You're safe." She moved when I guided her, docile and trusting like a child. I led her back to her bedroom, the door standing open just beyond where she'd been standing. Had she unlocked it from the inside? Had she opened it without waking? The deadbolt mechanism lay disengaged, the door ajar. I tucked her into bed, pulling the blanket up over her shoulders. She settled immediately into what looked like normal sleep, her breathing unchanged, her eyes still closed. I stood there for a long moment, watching her, my heart pounding. She was telling the truth. The lock wasn't about hiding something. It was about keeping her safe. I felt like a monster for ever questioning her. My daughter needed protection, not suspicion. I went back downstairs, but I didn't sleep. I lay on the sofa bed, staring at the ceiling, running through what I'd just witnessed. Celeste standing in the dark hallway with her eyes closed, her hand on the wall, the unlocked door. Everything about it had looked genuine, not performed, not staged, just the simple, terrifying reality of someone walking in their sleep, unaware and vulnerable. What if I hadn't heard her? What if she'd walked down the stairs in that state, stumbled, fallen? What if she'd opened the front door and walked out into the February cold? The deadbolt made perfect sense now. It wasn't suspicious. It was necessary. I waited until I heard normal morning sounds from upstairs before going to the kitchen. Celeste came down at her usual time, already dressed for her morning video calls, her laptop bag over her shoulder. She looked tired but alert, no different from any other morning. I poured coffee for both of us, trying to find the right words. "Do you remember getting up last night?" I asked carefully. "Around 2 in the morning." She paused, coffee cup halfway to her lips, confusion crossing her face. "What? No, She set the cup down. "Dad, what happened?" "I found you in the hallway," I said gently. "You were sleepwalking. Eyes closed, hand on the wall. You didn't respond when I called your name." The color drained from her face. She sat down heavily in the kitchen chair, staring at me. "I don't remember any of that," she said, and her voice trembled slightly. "I remember going to bed around 10:30. I remember locking the door, then nothing until my alarm went off this morning. I guided you back to your room," I told her. "Tucked you in. You went right back to sleep." "Oh my God." She put her hand over her mouth. "Dad, what if I'd gone outside? What if I'd fallen down the stairs? Thank you for stopping me." The fear in her voice was genuine. I could hear it, see it in her eyes, in the way her hands shook slightly as she picked up her coffee cup again. "The lock is a good idea," I said. "A very good idea." But you need to see a doctor about this, Celeste. This could be serious. I will, she promised. I'll make an appointment this week. God, I'm so sorry you had to deal with that. You must have been terrified. I was worried, I admitted. But you're safe. That's what matters. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I don't know what I'd do without you, Dad. We finished breakfast talking about her upcoming work deadlines, about the appointment she'd make with her doctor, about whether she should consider sleeping medication. Normal conversation. Father and daughter. A problem identified, a solution being sought. I took my vitamins from the blue box Thursday's compartment. Celeste watched me swallow them, that same concerned, caring expression on her face. That morning I stopped asking about the lock. I thought I was being a good father. I was being a perfect victim. I never questioned the locked door again. Celeste had given me exactly what I needed to stop asking a fear greater than my suspicion, the terror of my daughter wandering in the dark and hurting herself. The lock became something I was grateful for instead of something that kept me awake at night, wondering. I didn't know that every night at 10 o'clock, Celeste was locking that door and doing something that had nothing to do with sleep or safety or any of the stories she'd told me. I didn't know that the sleepwalking episode I'd witnessed had been carefully staged, practiced, timed perfectly to occur when my questions about the contradictions had started becoming persistent. I only knew that my daughter needed protecting, that the lock was keeping her safe, that I'd been wrong to doubt her. And in April, when Thane Caldwell asked for a private meeting in my office at Garrison Manufacturing, I still believed every word she'd said. April came with the sleepwalking episode still fresh in my mind, still justifying every locked door and every doubt I'd suppressed. I thought the worst concern I had was keeping Celeste safe at night. Then Thane Caldwell closed the conference room door and opened his laptop, and the numbers on the screen rearranged everything I thought I knew about my company. Thane was 34 head of my IT department. For the past 6 years, the kind of employee who noticed things other people missed. He'd asked for this meeting via a carefully worded email, private matter regarding system monitoring. Urgent but discreet. Now he sat across from me in the small conference room at Garrison Manufacturing, his laptop turned so I could see the screen. A spreadsheet. Columns of dates and amounts. Transaction codes I didn't recognize. I'm not sure what this is, Mr. Garrison, Thane said, his voice low despite the closed door. But I think you need to know. These transactions, they're not in any authorization log. I leaned forward, studying the numbers. Small amounts. Nothing that would trigger automatic alerts, but steady, consistent following a pattern that looked almost algorithmic in its precision. How long has this been happening? I asked. 3 months, Thane said. Started in January. Small amounts, steady pattern, all going to the same overseas account. But the total is significant. He clicked to another tab. The sum made my stomach drop. Not enough to cripple the company, but enough to notice. Enough to hurt. Where's this account? I asked. Shell company registered in Delaware. Actual operations appear to be California-based. The routing is deliberately complex. I only caught it because I was running a routine security audit on access patterns. I stared at the screen, watching my secure world develop its first crack. January. The month Celeste had convinced me to move to the living room. The month the blue box of vitamins had appeared. The month everything had started changing. Who has authorization to make transfers like this? I asked. That's the problem, Thane said carefully. According to the system logs, you do. But I know you didn't authorize these. The digital signature doesn't match your typical pattern. Someone with access to your credentials is making these transfers. My credentials, my authorization, my company's money flowing somewhere I'd never approved. Keep monitoring, I said, hearing my voice sound steadier than I felt. Don't tell anyone about this conversation. Not yet. Should I freeze the account? No. I thought quickly. If we freeze it, whoever's doing this will know we're onto them. Keep watching. Document everything. Let me handle the investigation from here. I asked Thane to keep it quiet. I thought I was being strategic. I didn't know I was giving them more time. Thane nodded, closed his laptop, and left through the conference room door looking as worried as I felt. I sat alone for 20 minutes, staring at the polished wood table, trying to make sense of unauthorized transactions that bore my digital signature but not my knowledge. Who had access to my credentials? Who would steal from my own company using my authorization? Who had been patient enough to take small amounts for 3 months betting I wouldn't notice? I drove home hours later, my thoughts circling those transaction patterns like a dog circling something dead in the road. When I pulled into the driveway, Lorraine Whitfield was waiting by the front door. Lorraine had been our housekeeper for 15 years, since before Helen died. She was 61, steady and reliable, the kind of person who knew where everything was and never needed to be told twice. She came twice a week to clean, did the grocery shopping I never remembered to do, and had known Celeste since she was a child visiting from California. Now she stood by the door with her purse clutched in both hands, her face tight with something that looked like worry mixed with determination. "Mr. Garrison," she said as I got out of the car, "I need to tell you something about Dad. Lorraine just told me she has to resign." Celeste's voice cut through from the doorway, bright and apologetic. "Family emergency, isn't that right, Lorraine?" I looked from Celeste to Lorraine. The housekeeper's mouth closed. Her eyes met mine, and I saw something desperate there, something urgent. "Family reasons," Lorraine said quietly, but her hands were shaking on her purse. "I'm sorry I can't. I'm very sorry." "What kind of emergency?" I asked. "Is there anything we can do to help?" "It's complicated," Celeste said, coming down the front steps to stand beside me. "Her sister in Michigan needs full-time care. Lorraine has to leave today, actually, right now." "Today?" I stared at Lorraine. After 15 years, Lorraine took a step toward me, reached out and squeezed my hand once. Her fingers were ice cold. Her eyes held something I couldn't read. "I wanted to thank you," she said, "for everything. You've been good to me." "Lorraine, I have to go," she said, pulling her hand back. "I'm sorry. I wish things were different." She walked to her car, a sensible gray sedan she'd driven for years, and got in without looking back. I stood in the driveway watching her pull away, Celeste standing beside me, making sympathetic noises about family obligations and unfortunate timing. "That's so sudden," I said. "Did she seem upset to you?" "Devastated," Celeste said. "But you know how it is with aging parents. Family has to come first." Lorraine's eyes held something I couldn't read. Later I would understand it was goodbye. I watched her taillights disappear around the corner, holding the word betrayal in my mind for the first time. Not about Lorraine. About whoever was stealing from my company. About the coincidence of warnings arriving in pairs. 2 warnings in one day. Money disappearing from my business using my own authorization. My housekeeper of 15 years fired or forced out before she could finish a sentence that started with, "I need to tell you something about." The pieces were there, but I couldn't see the picture they made yet. I couldn't connect unauthorized financial transactions to a locked bedroom door, to a housekeeper's desperate eyes, to vitamins in a blue box. I stood on the driveway as the April evening darkened around me, and I didn't know that Lorraine had tried to save me. I didn't know that in her pocket was evidence she'd been gathering for weeks. Evidence she'd planned to show me, evidence that would have changed everything if Celeste hadn't appeared in that doorway at exactly the right moment to intercept the warning. I only knew that something was wrong. Finally, undeniably, something was very wrong. That night, I lay on the sofa bed, turning the word betrayal over in my mind, unable to fit it to my daughter's face. The next morning, Lorraine came back one final time. She held my hand at the front door, and in the second before Celeste appeared behind me, she pressed something small and folded into my palm. "I'll make sure Dad sees you off properly, Lorraine," Celeste said from the doorway. "Family emergencies are so difficult." Lorraine's fingers tightened around mine. Her eyes met mine with that desperate urgency again. "Take care of yourself, Mr. Garrison," she said quietly. "Please." I walked her to her car, Celeste following a few steps behind. Lorraine opened her car door, paused, turned back. Then she was gone, and I was standing in the driveway with my daughter beside me, making sad noises about loyalty and difficult choices. I found the paper hours later in my study, reaching into my jacket pocket for reading glasses. A small square of notepaper folded tight. I unfolded it carefully. Numbers. Just numbers. A sequence 1742-8. I stared at it. No other writing. No explanation. Just 3 numbers separated by dashes. What was this? A phone number missing digits. A date. Some kind of code. I tried multiple interpretations. Could it be an address? A combination. A reference to something I should recognize. I stared at those numbers for an hour. I didn't know they were the combination to my daughter's safe where every document of her betrayal was stored. I folded the paper and put it in my wallet behind my driver's license. I didn't understand what Lorraine was trying to tell me, but I trusted that she knew something important enough to risk passing me a note under Celeste's watchful eyes. 3 weeks passed. May arrived with longer days and the morning fog that still hadn't lifted from my brain despite the vitamins. The blue box appeared like clockwork. The deadbolt clicked at 10 every night. The unauthorized transactions kept flowing according to Thane's encrypted emails. Finally, I gathered the courage to ask. We were having dinner, Chinese takeout, both of us eating from paper cartons at the dining room table. I'd rehearsed the words all day. "Honey," I said, setting down my chopsticks, "I noticed some unusual account activity. Can you help me understand?" Celeste's chopsticks hit her plate with a sharp click. Her face shifted from relaxed to wounded instantly. "Are you spying on me, Dad?" she said, her voice rising. "Seriously? After everything I'm dealing with at work, you're treating me like I'm stealing from you." "No, I didn't mean—" "What exactly are you accusing me of?" She pushed back from the table, standing. "I live here. I help take care of you. I moved back from California to keep you company after Mom died. And this is how you thank me. Celeste, I'm not accusing you of anything. I just noticed—" "I can't believe this." Her voice cracked. "I feel like a criminal in my own home. Do you have any idea how much pressure I'm under? The California project is falling apart. My boss is writing me constantly. I'm barely sleeping. And now my own father is interrogating me." I watched tears form in her eyes. Real tears, or tears that looked real enough that I couldn't tell the difference. "I'm sorry," I heard myself say. "I didn't mean to upset you. You want to audit my spending? Fine." She grabbed her purse, pulled out her wallet, threw credit card receipts across the table. "There. Groceries, gas, work clothes, 1 lunch out last week. Is that suspicious enough?" "Celeste, please. I thought you trusted me," she said, her voice quiet, now hurt instead of angry. "I thought we were past this. I thought you understood that I'm trying to help you." My resolve crumbled. I stood up, reached for her hand. "I'm sorry, sweetheart," I said. "You're right. I'm being paranoid. The stress, I'm not thinking clearly." "You scared me," she said softly. "For a second, I thought you actually believed I would steal from you." "Never," I lied. "I'm sorry." She let me hug her, patted my shoulder, told me it was okay, that she understood. I apologized to my daughter that night, and I hated myself for it. Not because I was wrong, but because I knew I was right and still didn't have the strength to stand firm. We finished dinner making small talk about her work, about the weather, about everything except the question hanging in the air. Why had a gentle inquiry provoked such an extreme response? I went to bed that night with 2 pieces of evidence I couldn't use, numbers I couldn't decode, and questions I couldn't ask without being made to feel like a monster. Celeste had turned my love for her into a weapon against my own survival, and I was only beginning to understand how perfectly she wielded it. I lay on the sofa bed in the dark, listening to the deadbolt slide into place at exactly 10 o'clock, and wondered what kind of father doubted his own daughter. What kind of man let paranoia override trust? I didn't know yet that in the nights that followed, the sounds through the walls would become impossible to ignore. I didn't know that Celeste's locked door was hiding something that had nothing to do with sleep or safety or any of the explanations I'd been given. I only knew that I'd asked one question and been made to apologize for asking. And that somewhere in my wallet, 3 numbers waited to tell me something I wasn't yet ready to hear. The days after I apologized felt like living underwater. I had evidence I couldn't use and questions I couldn't ask. But the nights were when the truth started seeping through the walls. The metal sound came through at 11:43, soft enough that I might have imagined it if I hadn't been lying awake waiting to hear exactly that. I'd been on the sofa bed for hours staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle. The deadbolt had clicked at 10 o'clock as it always did. I'd heard Celeste's footsteps move across the bedroom floor, heard her bedroom door close, heard that familiar slide of metal into metal that had once seemed like protection and now felt like concealment. Then silence. An hour of silence. I'd almost convinced myself to sleep when I heard it. Metal on metal. Not the deadbolt, something smaller, more delicate. Like a combination lock being worked. Like a safe being opened. I held my breath listening. Paper rustling. Not the soft sound of someone turning in bed with a book, but the crisp shuffle of documents being sorted, organized, moved from one place to another. Methodical. Deliberate. Then breathing. Not the deep, even rhythm of sleep, but the concentrated pattern of someone working, someone focused on a task that required attention. That's not sleeping, I thought. That's working. But working on what? I checked the clock. 11:47. I lay there in the darkness, barely breathing, myself listening to the sounds filter through the shared wall between the living room and the bedroom Celeste had claimed. Metal again. Click, 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 like tumblers falling into place. More paper rustling, a soft exhale, then the deadbolt. But not the familiar sound of someone locking themselves in for the night. This was different. The bolt sliding back, being unlocked. From inside. Silence for several minutes while my heart hammered against my ribs. Then the deadbolt again, sliding forward, locking from inside. I lay there counting the sounds. Metal, paper, breathing, the deadbolt. I wasn't guessing anymore. I knew. She'd unlocked the bedroom door, done something. What? Checked the hallway, retrieved something, put something back, then locked it again. All while supposedly sleeping. All behind a door she claimed was necessary because of snoring, because of security, because of sleepwalking. I listened for another hour. The sounds continued. Soft but unmistakable. The metal clicking. The papers moving. The careful, quiet work of someone who didn't want to be heard. At 1 a.m, the sounds stopped. Complete silence. Then footsteps crossing the room. A few minutes later, the deep, even breathing of actual sleep. I stared at the ceiling until dawn, unable to stop replaying what I'd heard. The next night, I couldn't sleep at all. I lay there in the darkness, listening, waiting. The deadbolt clicked at 10 o'clock. Footsteps. Then silence. At 11:30, the sounds began again. This time I got up. I moved through the dark living room as quietly as I could, climbed the stairs one careful step at a time, avoiding the 4th step that creaked. The hallway was pitch black. I stood outside Celeste's door, my ear pressed against the wood. The sounds were clearer here. Metal on metal, definitely. Papers rustling. And something else, a soft laugh. Not joyful. Pleased. Satisfied. The kind of sound someone makes when they've accomplished something. Then low mumbling. Words I couldn't make out. Was she talking to herself, to someone on a phone, to a computer screen? I raised my hand and knocked gently. Instant silence. Complete. Like someone had hit a pause button on the world. I weighted my knuckles still against the wood. "What do you need, Dad?" Celeste's voice came through the door. Cold. Calm. Not sleepy. Not surprised. Just flat. "Celeste, honey, are you okay?" I heard. "What did you hear?" The question stopped me. Not defensive. Not worried. Just curious. Clinical. "I heard laughter," I said. "I wanted to make sure you're all right." Silence for 3 heartbeats. "I'm watching videos to help me sleep," she said. "It's after midnight, Dad. Please go back to bed." I stood there with my hand on the doorframe, listening to my own breathing in the dark hallway. "What kind of videos?" I asked. "Does it matter?" Her voice had an edge now. "You're standing outside my door at midnight interrogating me about what I'm watching in my own room. This is exactly what we talked about. The spying. The suspicion. I'm not—" "Good night, Dad." I heard her move away from the door. Heard the soft sound of her getting back into bed, or sitting back down at whatever she'd been working on. I stood in that dark hallway realizing words through a door would never be enough. I needed to see what was behind it. I went back downstairs, lay down on the sofa bed, and stared at the ceiling. The sounds didn't resume that night. She knew I'd been listening. She'd gone silent, but I knew what I'd heard. Metal locks clicking. Papers rustling. Work being done at midnight while the rest of the house slept. A deadbolt being unlocked and relocked from inside. A laugh that had nothing to do with videos for sleeping. I couldn't sleep that night or the nights after. Every sound through the wall became another piece of evidence I couldn't show anyone, another conversation through a locked door that proved nothing. I was gathering certainty, but not proof, and somewhere in those sleepless hours I understood that knowing and proving were 2 different things entirely. Lorraine's numbers sat in my wallet, 17428. Thane's reports came via encrypted email showing money still flowing from my company to an account I'd never authorized. Celeste's locked door stood between me and the truth. I had 3 pieces of evidence now. Numbers I couldn't decode, transactions I couldn't trace, and sounds I couldn't record. I knew my daughter was lying to me. I knew she was doing something behind that locked door that had nothing to do with sleep or safety or any of the stories she'd told. But knowing meant nothing without proof, and proof meant getting past a deadbolt installed by someone who'd thought of everything. The next morning, I would ask her about the laughter again, and she would give me a 3rd explanation delivered with the same calm certainty as the first 2, and I would finally understand just how perfect her lies had become. Morning came after a sleepless night spent staring at the ceiling, knowing I needed proof but having no idea how to get it. She didn't wait for me to ask about the laughter. She brought it up herself over coffee, and that's when I realized my daughter's lies had evolved beyond anything I could counter. "Dad, about last night," Celeste said, sitting across from me at the kitchen table. "I know you heard me laughing. I should have explained earlier." I looked up from my coffee, waiting. "I've been practicing my presentation skills," she said, meeting my eyes without the slightest hesitation. "The board meetings are brutal right now, and I need to rehearse staying calm under pressure, handling difficult questions from investors, managing my delivery, even controlling my facial expressions." She poured milk into her coffee with steady hands. Not a tremor, not a shake. The stream of white liquid hit the dark coffee in a perfect controlled pour. "Sometimes I rehearse responses out loud," she continued. "And when I get one right, when I nail a particularly tough answer, I laugh. It's relief, mostly. Satisfaction that I've finally figured out how to phrase something." I nodded mechanically, the coffee cup warm against my palms. "I'm sorry if I disturbed you," she said. "I should practice during the day, but with the California time zone difference, I'm on late calls until 10 or 11 most nights. By the time I'm done, midnight practice sessions are all I have left." Her eyes held mine. No wavering, no looking away, no nervous flutter of lashes or tightening around the mouth that might signal deception. Board meetings, I heard myself say. That makes sense. Thank you for understanding. She smiled, warm, genuine, the smile of a daughter grateful for her father's patience. I know I've been putting you through a lot lately. The lock, the late nights, all the stress. But this project will be over soon and things will get back to normal. My daughter's hands didn't tremble when she lied. That meant she'd been doing it long enough to master it. I watched her finish her coffee, rinse her cup in the sink, kiss the top of my head before heading upstairs to her locked bedroom for her morning video calls. Every movement natural. Every word delivered with perfect confidence. 3 different explanations for the same locked door, security and relaxation. Then sleepwalking prevention. Now midnight presentation practice, and each one told with the same flawless composure. This wasn't a nervous daughter making up excuses. This was an expert performer executing a role. And the perfection itself was terrifying. I sat at that kitchen table for an hour after she went upstairs, my coffee growing cold, trying to understand when my daughter had learned to lie this well. When had she practiced enough to eliminate every tell, every nervous gesture, every micro-expression that might betray deception? The answer I didn't want to accept was probably her entire adult life. What I didn't know that morning, what I wouldn't discover until months later, when documents appeared in court, was what Celeste did that same afternoon. She drove to the office of Dr. Nadine Thornton, a 51-year-old clinical psychologist with a private practice in downtown Columbus. She'd made the appointment 3 days earlier after the dinner conversation, where I'd asked about the unusual account activity. Dr. Thornton listened sympathetically as my daughter sat in her comfortable office chair and described living with a controlling, invasive father who monitored her constantly without respecting personal boundaries, especially during a stressful work period. "He questions everything I do," Celeste said, and the court transcripts would later show she cried at precisely this moment. "I can't have privacy in my own home without him treating me like I'm hiding something." She described my knock on her door at midnight, my questions about account activity, my suspicion and doubt. All of it presented as evidence of a father who'd become obsessive and paranoid, who saw conspiracy in normal behavior, who made his adult daughter feel like a criminal in her own home. "The stress from work is crushing me," Celeste told Dr. Thornton, her voice breaking at exactly the right moment. "And instead of support, I get interrogation. I feel watched, monitored, like I can't breathe." Dr. Thornton took careful notes. She asked gentle questions about my behavior patterns, about how long this had been going on, about whether Celeste felt safe. And Celeste answered every question with the same perfect balance of emotional distress and attempted composure, crying at precise moments, stopping the tears at perfect intervals to show she was trying to be strong. The psychologist saw a daughter suffering under unreasonable parental scrutiny. She saw stress manifesting as anxiety. She saw a young woman who needed validation and support. She didn't see the performance. By the end of the 50-minute session, Dr. Thornton had begun drafting a medical certificate documenting my daughter's claims, a professional clinical record of Eugene Garrison's controlling behavior toward his adult daughter. Evidence that would later appear in legal filings carrying the weight of medical expertise and professional observation. I didn't know this appointment existed until months later when her medical records appeared in court. I sat at breakfast that morning watching her lie perfectly, while across town she was turning me into the villain in someone else's notes. I took my vitamins from the blue box. Thursday's compartment. The morning fog in my brain that had become so normal, I barely noticed it anymore. Celeste watched me swallow them, that same caring expression on her face. "Don't forget your doctor's appointment next week," she said. "The one about your snoring." I'd forgotten I'd even made that appointment. The sleep apnea consultation she'd insisted I schedule. "I won't forget," I said. She smiled and went upstairs. The deadbolt clicked into place. and I sat alone in the kitchen understanding that I had crossed from doubting my suspicions to fearing my daughter's capabilities. 3 different explanations for one locked door, each delivered with the same calm perfection, the same steady hands, the same unwavering eyes. No nervous tells, no hesitation, no visible seams in the lies. Somewhere in a psychologist's office I didn't know existed. I was being transformed from concerned father into documented threat, and I had no idea how to fight an enemy who could cry on command lie without trembling and build false evidence while maintaining perfect eye contact. That night, I would sit alone with Helen's photograph and remember advice I hadn't understood until now. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the perfection of Celeste's lies, the way her hands didn't tremble. I sat under the lamp with Lorraine's folded paper, trying every combination I could imagine, while Helen's photograph watched from the wall the way she'd watched me for 7 years since her death. The numbers stared back at me: 1742-8. Phone number, too short. Account number didn't match our bank's. A date, February 17, 1942, meant nothing to Celeste's timeline. Coordinates, too few digits. A code for what system? I spread the paper flat under the lamp's yellow light. Lorraine had risked everything to pass me this note. She'd squeezed my hand with desperate urgency and whispered about a blue box on the guest bedroom closet's top shelf. I hadn't checked the guest bedroom yet. Celeste was always home, always watching. But these numbers, 1742-8, they had to mean something. I looked up at Helen's photograph. Our wedding day, 1978. She'd been 65 when she died, and I'd been 61, and neither of us had imagined we'd have so little time. "Believe what you know, not what you hear," she'd said. The memory came back sharp and clear, despite 7 years of trying to let it fade. Helen in the hospital bed, her hand in mine, so weak from the illness. The morphine drip already pulling her away from me. "Promise me," she'd whispered, barely audible over the beeping monitors. "I promise." I'd said, not understanding what I was promising. "Believe what you know, not what you hear." Especially with Celeste. I'd been confused. Celeste had been 32 then, living in California, the devoted daughter who called every Sunday. Why would Helen warn me about her in dying moments? "She's not what you think," Helen had struggled to say. "I tried to, but you wouldn't believe." Then the morphine took her, and she never spoke coherently again. I'd dismissed it as deathbed confusion, illness scrambling her thoughts. I'd spent 7 years convinced she'd simply been too sick to think clearly. Now I sat looking at her photograph, understanding flooding through me. Helen had known. 7 years ago, she'd known something about Celeste that I couldn't see. She'd tried to warn me, and I'd dismissed her concerns as maternal overprotection had defended Celeste whenever Helen expressed worry. Helen died not knowing Celeste would become what she feared. But somehow she knew to warn me anyway. "I didn't understand what you meant then," I said to the photograph. "I'm trying to understand now. Believe what you know, not what you hear." I knew the sounds through the wall were real. Metal clicking, papers rustling, work being done at midnight behind a locked door. That was knowledge, direct experience, undeniable evidence. I knew Celeste had given me 3 different explanations for the same locked door, each delivered with perfect composure. That was knowledge too. I knew Thane had shown me unauthorized transactions. That was documented fact. What I'd heard was Celeste's explanations, her reasons, her stories about snoring and security and sleepwalking and presentation practice, all designed to make me doubt what I knew in favor of what she told me. Believe what you know, not what you hear. Helen had been teaching me how to resist gaslighting before I even knew I'd need the skill. I looked back down at the numbers. 1742-8. Still meaningless. Still encrypted in code I couldn't break. But Lorraine had given them to me for a reason. She'd risked her job, her 15 years of service, to slip this paper into my palm. She'd trusted I would understand eventually. 2 women had tried to protect me. Helen with her deathbed warning, Lorraine with her cryptic numbers and whispered directions. I put that paper in my wallet next to Helen's photograph. 2 pieces of evidence I couldn't use yet. 2 women trying to save me. The house was quiet. The furnace cycling. The wood settling. And from upstairs, nothing. No metal clicking tonight. Celeste had gone silent since I'd knocked on her door, cautious now aware I was listening. I sat under the lamp, holding my wallet, looking at the small square of paper that might contain everything or nothing, and I made a choice. I chose to trust what I couldn't yet prove. I chose to believe Helen's warning, and Lorraine's numbers were pieces of a puzzle I'd eventually solve. I chose to trust my own knowledge over my daughter's perfectly delivered lies. The numbers meant nothing to me that night, just another mystery in a house full of locked doors and perfect lies. But I kept them because Helen taught me to trust what I knew even when I couldn't prove it, and because Lorraine risked her job to slip them into my hand. I didn't know those numbers 17428 would eventually unlock the safe where Celeste kept every document of her betrayal. I didn't know they represented the combination to a portable safe hidden in her closet, containing forged signatures and fraudulent contracts, and evidence of conspiracy stretching from Columbus to California. I only knew that 2 women who loved me had left me clues, and I trusted them more than I trusted the daughter whose hands didn't tremble when she lied. The next morning, my body would tell me what my daughter had been doing to me for months. But that night, I sat with Helen's photograph and Lorraine's numbers, choosing faith over proof, learning what it meant to believe what I knew. The numbers sat in my wallet for days, a promise I couldn't yet redeem. But my body was telling me something more urgent, something that had been speaking in whispers for months, and now demanded I listen. Dr. Henley looked at my blood test results for a long moment, before asking if I was taking any supplements. And in that pause, I felt my daughter's careful betrayal crystallize into something I could finally name: poison. I'd scheduled the appointment myself, choosing Dr. Graham Henley, my private physician for 15 years, rather than asking Celeste for a recommendation. That small act of secrecy had saved me from ending up with another doctor on her payroll, another professional whose notes would document what she wanted them to see instead of what was real. Eugene, Dr. Henley said, setting the lab report on his desk between us, these compound levels are extremely high, much higher than you'd get from food. Are you taking any herbal supplements? I sat in the patient chair across from him, the morning fog in my brain thick, despite 2 cups of coffee. 4 months of worsening fatigue. 4 months of struggling to think clearly before noon. 4 months of dismissing it as age, as stress, as anything except what it actually was. What kind of compounds? I asked. Valerian root extract, passion flower. Both sedative herbs generally safe in normal doses, but your levels suggest sustained high-dose consumption. If this continues long-term, we're looking at potential liver damage, cognitive impairment, possibly worse. The blue box. Every morning. Celeste's voice across the kitchen table. Dad, you have to take these regularly. I've researched this thoroughly for men your age. My daughter, I said quietly. She's been giving me vitamins for 4 months, since January. Dr. Henley's expression shifted from concerned to carefully neutral. I'd like to see those vitamins. Can you bring the container to our next appointment? I will. In the meantime, stop taking them immediately. If you experience withdrawal symptoms, anxiety, insomnia, tremors, call me right away. I drove home in silence, my hands tight on the steering wheel. She'd been poisoning me. My daughter had been poisoning me every morning while asking if I slept well. 3 days later, I sat across the desk from Lawrence Prescott in his law office in downtown Columbus. Lawrence was 66, my attorney for 20 years, a trusted friend who'd handled company contracts and Helen's estate. He'd known Celeste since she was 19. Now he listened without interrupting as I methodically presented everything. Thane's financial transaction report showing unauthorized transfers to overseas accounts. 3 months of money flowing out of Garrison Manufacturing using my digital signature, but not my authorization. Dr. Henley's blood test results. 4 months of systematic poisoning with sedative herbs designed to keep me foggy compliant, unable to think clearly enough to notice what was happening. Lorraine's cryptic number sequence 1742-8 slipped into my hand moments before Celeste fired her for trying to warn me. The locked bedroom door. 3 different explanations. The sounds through the wall at midnight. Metal clicking. Papers rustling. Work being done while I was supposed to believe she was sleeping. And I said, there are forged documents, signatures that look like mine but aren't. I can't prove it yet, but the pattern suggests it. Lawrence had taken notes throughout my explanation, his face growing graver with each detail. Now he set down his pen and looked at me. Eugene, listen carefully, he said. If what you're telling me is accurate and I believe you, this isn't a family dispute. This is organized economic crime. Forgery fraud, financial elder abuse, possible attempted guardianship fraud. We're looking at potential federal charges. The words hung in the air between us. Federal charges. Against my daughter. The poisoning, Lawrence continued. That alone elevates this to a different level. She wasn't just stealing from you. She was incapacitating you systematically to prevent you from discovering the theft. What do? I asked. We build the case properly, quietly. We need a digital investigator immediately, someone who can sweep your house for surveillance equipment, analyze the financial trails, recover any deleted data. We document everything before confronting her, because the moment she knows we're investigating evidence will disappear. How long will that take? Weeks, maybe a month. Can you maintain normal behavior at home for that long? I thought about sitting across the dinner table from Celeste, taking the blue pills she handed me, listening to her perfect lies. The idea made my stomach turn. I can stop taking the vitamins, I said. Tell her the doctor found an interaction with another medication. Good. Simple, believable. Nothing that suggests suspicion. Lawrence pulled a business card from his desk drawer. Keith Mercer, digital forensics specialist, former FBI. I'll call him this afternoon. For the first time in months, I wasn't carrying this alone. Lawrence knew everything, and he believed me. There's something else, Lawrence said, his voice gentle now. Once we start this investigation, there's no going back. If we find what I think we'll find, your daughter will face criminal charges, prison time potentially. Are you prepared for that? I looked at the business card in my hand. Keith Mercer, digital forensics. She poisoned me, I said. She's stealing from the company Helen and I built. She fired the only person brave enough to warn me. Whatever happens next, she chose this path. Lawrence nodded slowly. Then we begin. I left his office an hour later with Keith Mercer scheduled to sweep my house the next morning, while Celeste was at her video call meetings. A case file had been opened. Documentation had begun. For the first time since that deadbolt clicked in January, I felt something other than helpless confusion. I felt hope, but I couldn't go home yet and sit across the dinner table from my daughter like nothing had changed. Not when I finally knew what she'd been doing to me. Not when I understood that every kind word, every concerned question about my health, every gentle suggestion had been part of a calculated plan to destroy me. I drove to the cemetery instead, stood at Helen's grave in the June afternoon, and told her I finally understood her warning. Told her I was believing what I knew instead of what I heard. Told her I wished she were here to help me through what came next. The investigation had officially begun. Within days, Keith Mercer would find the device that explained why my phone calls kept failing at the worst possible moments. But that afternoon, I just stood at my wife's grave and let myself feel the full weight of my daughter's betrayal before I had to go home and pretend I still trusted her. The next morning I went home. Not to confront Celeste, but to let Keith Mercer sweep the house while she was locked in her room on a video call with California. Keith Mercer found the device in 11 minutes, a small black box, barely larger than my thumb, attached to the power outlet, behind Celeste's nightstand. And when he showed me the photograph, I understood why so many of my calls had failed at exactly the wrong moments. Keith was 42, a digital forensics specialist who'd spent 15 years with the FBI before going private. Lawrence had hired him the same afternoon I'd left his office, and now Keith moved through my house with quiet efficiency, scanning for electronic devices that shouldn't be there. I stood in the hallway while he worked in Celeste's bedroom, listening to her voice through the locked door, talking about quarterly projections and investor confidence. The same voice that had asked me every morning if I'd slept well while handing me pills designed to keep me foggy and compliant. Keith emerged 20 minutes later with his equipment bag and pulled out his phone to show me the photographs. "Signal jammer," he said, keeping his voice low. "Commercial grade. It's been cutting your calls and internet within about 15 feet of this outlet." I stared at the image. The device was so small, so innocuous. Just a black box that could fit in the palm of my hand. "That's why I couldn't reach Lawrence last month," I said. "When I tried calling from the living room, the signal kept dropping." "She wanted you isolated," Keith said. "No calls out, no calls in. Very deliberate. This isn't amateur work." "Did you remove it?" "Photographed only. If we take it now, she knows we're onto her. Better to leave everything in place, document the evidence chain, and build the case properly." Every piece of evidence pointed to my daughter. But I still needed to hear it from her own mouth. 2 weeks later, in mid-June, I sat in the conference room at Garrison Manufacturing with Lawrence, Keith, and Thane. The table was covered with documents, printouts of transaction records, forensic signature analysis, communication logs. Thane had spent 2 months systematically monitoring and documenting every unauthorized transfer. Now he walked us through the complete picture. 47 transactions over 3 months, he said, pointing to the timeline he'd created. January through March. Total value 40% of the company. Based on our current valuation, that's approximately $10 million, Mr. Garrison. $10 million. 40% of everything Helen and I had built over 4 decades. Every transfer went through a California-based intermediary account, Thane continued. The routing is deliberately complex, but they all end up controlled by an entity I don't recognize. The registration documents are layers deep. Lawrence was reading through the signature analysis, his expression grim. "These signatures are forged," he said, sliding several documents toward me. "I've seen your signature for 20 years. These aren't even close. Look at the capital G in Garrison. Yours has a distinctive loop. These are flat mechanical. Someone practiced enough to fool a casual observer, but not a forensic examiner." I looked at my own forged signature, repeated 47 times across months of systematic theft. "We can file criminal charges," Lawrence said. "We have poisoning jamming devices, forged signatures, 10 million in fraudulent transfers, federal wire fraud, organized economic crime, elder abuse. The case is solid." "But," I heard the hesitation in his voice, "but we still need the person behind this. We need to know who's on the other end of these transactions, who Celeste is working with. And we need to understand the end game. What was the plan after the money was moved?" I sat quiet, thinking about the sounds through the wall. The metal clicking, the papers rustling, the concentrated breathing of someone working methodically at midnight, the soft, satisfied laugh I'd heard through the door. "I know how to find out," I said quietly. "There's only one way." Lawrence looked at me. "What are you thinking?" "The bedroom, the locked door. Whatever she's doing in there at night, whoever she's talking to, that's where we'll find the answers." "We can't legally enter while she's out," Lawrence said. "Not without a warrant, and we don't have enough for that yet." "I'm not talking about entering while she's out," I said. "I'm talking about being in there while she's in there. Behind the bookshelf. There's a technical space from when we had electrical work done 12 years ago, about 50 centimeters deep, enough room to stand." Keith leaned forward. "You want to hide in your own bedroom and record your daughter's conversations?" "Yes. For how long? However long it takes." 8 hours, 10, until I hear what I need to hear. Lawrence was already shaking his head. Eugene, you're 68 years old. Standing motionless in a confined space for 8 hours. Is the only way to identify who she's working with and hear the full plan. I finished. We have evidence of crimes already committed. What we don't have is evidence of conspiracy. We don't have the why. We don't have the who. I was going to hide behind a bookshelf in my own house and spy on my own daughter. The father I used to be would have been ashamed. The man I'd become knew it was the only way. Ohio is one-party consent, Keith said. You can legally record conversations in your own home without the other party's knowledge, Lawrence sighed. If you're determined to do this, we plan it meticulously. Timing equipment safety protocols. You'll have a panic button. If anything goes wrong, medical emergency discovery. Anything you signal, and we extract you immediately. When I asked, we need to pick a night when we know she'll have the conversation. When she'll be talking to whoever's on the other end of this conspiracy. I thought about the pattern. The locked door at 10 o'clock every night. The sounds that started around 11. The work that continued past midnight. It happens every night, I said. We just need to pick one where I can position myself before she locks the door. When she thinks I'm somewhere else. We had poisoning jamming devices, forged signatures, and $10 million stolen from my life's work. We had everything except the person pulling the strings and the reason why. I told Lawrence I needed one more piece of evidence, the one I could only get by standing in the darkness behind my bedroom bookshelf and listening to my daughter tell someone else the truth she'd never tell me. The ambush would require perfect timing, absolute silence, and 8 hours of physical endurance. I wasn't sure my 68-year-old body could survive. But I'd survived 4 months of poisoning isolation and systematic betrayal. I could survive one more night. We planned the ambush like a military operation. The three of us sat in Lawrence's conference room with the blueprints of my house spread across the table, and I pointed to the gap behind the built-in bookshelf that I'd watched the electricians create 12 years ago, never imagining I'd use it to spy on my own daughter. I was there when they installed the main electrical panel, I said, tracing my finger along the blueprint's second-floor layout. The panel is recessed into the wall here behind the master bedroom. The electricians built the bookshelf as a facade, but they left a 50-centimeter gap for service access. Only I know it exists. Lawrence leaned over the blueprint, studying the dimensions. And Celeste doesn't know about this space. She moved in after Helen died. She's never seen behind that bookshelf. As far as she knows, it's built flush against the wall. Keith was taking measurements, comparing them to something on his phone. 50 centimeters is tight, but workable for your height, he said. And there's a utility outlet back there for the electrical panel. Your phone can charge while recording. You'll have unlimited battery. How do I get in without being seen? I asked. Timeline is critical, Lawrence said, pulling out a notepad. Walk me through a normal evening. I usually get home around 6. We have dinner around 7. Celeste goes upstairs between 9 and 9:30. The deadbolt clicks at exactly 10. So you'd need to be in position before 10, Keith said, which means entering the bedroom sometime between 6 and 9:30 when she's downstairs. I could tell her I'm going to work late, I said. Arrive home around 5:30 instead of 6. Say I forgot some files, go upstairs to the bedroom, slip into the technical space and wait. She'd never know I was there. Lawrence was writing everything down, his expression grave. Ohio is a one-party consent state, he said. You're recording in your own home. It's completely legal. Everything you capture will be admissible in court. No wiretapping violations, no illegal surveillance charges. How long will I need to be in there? I asked, though I already knew the answer would be measured in hours. Until you have what we need, Lawrence said. Identity of the co-conspirator, evidence of the plan, proof of intent. Could be 3 hours, could be 8. I built that house 30 years ago. I watched every contractor, approved every modification. I never thought that knowledge would be used like this. I'm 68 years old, I said. 8 hours standing in a 50-centimeter space. My body might not cooperate. There's medical risk, Keith acknowledged. Blood clots from prolonged standing. Muscle fatigue. If you need to move, you move. If you need to abort, you abort. But if I abort, we lose the evidence. If you collapse, we lose more than evidence, Lawrence said firmly. We establish protocols. You carry your phone. If anything goes wrong, medical emergency discovery, anything, you text us immediately. We have people who can be at your house in under 3 minutes. And if she discovers me, I asked the question we'd all been avoiding. You're in your own bedroom, Lawrence said. In a technical space, you have every right to access for electrical panel maintenance. You tell her you were checking a circuit that's been intermittent. It's not illegal. It's not trespassing. At worst, it's unusual. At worst, she knows we're on to her, I said. And everything disappears. The documents she's working on at midnight. The person she's talking to. All of it goes dark the second she realizes I'm investigating. Which is why you don't get discovered, Keith said. You wait until you're certain she's asleep before exiting. You move like you're defusing a bomb. Slow, silent, deliberate. We spent 2 more hours going over details. Entry procedure, recording settings, emergency extraction. What to do if she left the room. What to do if someone else entered. Contingencies for contingencies. Finally, Lawrence sat back in his chair. We can't force you to do this, he said. But we need the person behind those transactions. We need to hear it from Celeste's own mouth. Without that, we have theft, but not conspiracy. We have crimes, but not the full picture. I thought about Helen's warning. Believe what you know, not what you hear. But this time I needed to hear it. I needed to stand in the darkness and listen to my daughter speak the truth she'd never told me. Then that's what you'll get, I said. Tomorrow night. I shook their hands and walked to my car, knowing that tomorrow night I would either save everything I'd built or lose my daughter forever, possibly both. The June evening was warm, the sky still light at 8 o'clock. I drove through familiar Columbus streets past the coffee shop where Celeste and I used to meet for Sunday breakfast, past the park where I'd taught her to ride a bike 35 years ago. Somewhere along the way, that little girl had become someone I didn't recognize. Someone who could poison her father, forge his signature, steal millions, and lie with perfect composure about all of it. I practiced normal expressions in the rearview mirror. Mild interest when she talked about her day. Gentle concern if she mentioned work stress. The face of a father who trusted his daughter instead of the face of a man planning to record evidence of her federal crimes. I pulled into the driveway at 8:15. The house looked exactly as it always did. Warm light in the kitchen window. Celeste's car in the garage. The bedroom window dark upstairs, waiting. Inside, I'd sit across the dinner table and ask about her California meetings. I'd take the vitamin pills she handed me or pretend to and thank her for caring about my health. I'd mention that I might work late tomorrow, just in case she needed to know. I'd be the perfect father for one more night. And tomorrow I would stand in the darkness behind my bedroom wall and listen to my daughter destroy the last pieces of trust between us. I would record every word. I would document every conspiracy. I would gather the evidence that would either vindicate me or condemn her. The father I used to be couldn't have imagined this moment. The man I'd become had no choice. I got out of the car, walked to the front door, and prepared to perform normalcy one final time before everything changed. But the plan would change the instant I saw her car already in the garage, 2 hours early the next evening, her bedroom light on when it should have been dark, forcing me to make a split-second decision that would determine everything. I'd rehearsed the plan a dozen times. Arrive at 5:30, tell Celeste I'm working late, slip into the technical space by 5:50, wait for the deadbolt at 10. Her car was already in the garage when I pulled into the driveway at 5:25, 2 hours before she was supposed to be home, and I had 30 seconds to decide whether to abort the entire operation or improvise a plan that could destroy everything. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. The bedroom light was on upstairs. She was home. Right now. Abort. Walk inside, pretend tomorrow would work better, but there might not be a tomorrow. She might discover we were investigating. She might move the evidence. I grabbed my briefcase from the trunk and walked to the front door like a man who'd forgotten some documents. Just grabbing some documents I forgot. I called up the stairs. I'll be gone in a minute. Okay, Dad. Celeste's voice floated down. Have a good night. I climbed the stairs, my heart hammering. The bedroom door stood open. Celeste sat at her laptop, her back to me, headphones on typing. The bookshelf was against the far wall. The clock showed 5:32 p.m. I made that decision in the space between heartbeats. Go in now or never go in at all. I went in. I'm heading out, I said loud enough for her to hear through the headphones. She half turned, gave a little wave, already turning back to her screen. I walked across the room as if heading to the closet, then veered left toward the bookshelf. My hands found the edge. I'd watched the contractors install this 12 years ago, had approved every detail. I slipped behind the bookshelf into the 50-centimeter technical space, pulling myself into the darkness, wood pressing against my chest, and the electrical panel warm against my back. I froze, absolutely still. 3 feet away through the bookshelf, I could hear Celeste's fingers on her keyboard. Click, click, click. She hadn't noticed. She was 3 feet away. If she turned around right now, it was over. But she kept typing. I stood in the darkness, barely breathing. My phone clutched in one hand, already set to record. 50 centimeters from bookshelf to wall. Just enough room to stand if I didn't mind being crushed. The air smelled of dust and metal and 30 years of accumulated heat. Footsteps. Celeste was moving across the room. I stopped breathing entirely. Closet door opening. Hangers sliding. She was changing clothes, her back still to the bookshelf. Still oblivious. Minutes passed like hours. Her phone rang. She answered it, voice bright and professional, talking about portfolio analysis. I listened to her lie about being in the office, about working late. By 7 o'clock, my legs were beginning to go numb. 90 minutes standing in the same locked position. Knees slightly bent back, pressed against the electrical panel, arms tight against my sides. The panel was warm, steadily radiating heat. The dust was thick, and every breath threatened to trigger a cough that would give me away. I couldn't cough. Couldn't shift my weight. The floorboards would creak. I'd supervised the installation of these floors 28 years ago. I knew exactly which boards made noise, so I stood motionless while feeling gradually drained from my feet, while my calves began to cramp, while my lower back started sending signals that would become screaming pain. Through the bookshelf, I could hear everything. Celeste's footsteps, her laptop keys, a phone call at 7:30 where she laughed at something someone said, that same perfect laugh she'd used on me 1,000 times. By 8 o'clock, my back was screaming, and I still had over 2 hours before the deadbolt would click. I checked my phone in the darkness. Battery at 43%. Recording had been running for 2.5 hours, capturing nothing but normal sounds. Footsteps, typing, phone calls about work. I thought about Helen. About building this house 30 years ago when Celeste was an infant. I'd held her in this very room, standing in almost this exact spot, singing her to sleep when she couldn't settle. I'd walked back and forth, bouncing gently, humming old songs, watching my daughter's eyes finally close in trust and peace. I used to hold her in this room. Now I was hiding from her in the walls. Somewhere between those two moments, I lost my daughter. My left foot had gone completely numb. I tried to shift weight imperceptibly to my right foot. Pain shot up my calf like electricity. Through the bookshelf, Celeste's voice. Yeah, I'm just finishing up some work. Should be done soon. Soon meant what? 9 o'clock, 10. Would she go to bed early? Or would she stay up late? And I'd have to stand here until midnight. I couldn't last until midnight. My body was already telling me that. The numbness. The cramping. The way my vision was starting to narrow at the edges from shallow breathing combined with stress and heat. At 8 o'clock, my back was screaming, and my legs were numb, and I still had over 2 hours before the deadbolt would click, and whatever was going to happen would finally start happening. I stood in that darkness, thinking about Helen, about baby Celeste, about the house I'd built with my own supervision 30 years ago that had just become my prison. I checked my phone again. Battery at 38%. I'd been so focused on the recording on entry and exit logistics on the legal framework. I hadn't thought about the one variable I couldn't control from behind a bookshelf. I wouldn't realize the problem until it was almost too late. The screen glowed faint in the darkness, 8%. My charger was downstairs in the living room. My legs had stopped feeling like legs 40 minutes ago. And the deadbolt hadn't clicked yet. My charger was in my bag. My bag was downstairs in the living room, unreachable. I stood in the 50-centimeter gap behind the bookshelf, my back pressed against the warm electrical panel, my legs numb from the knees down, watching the battery percentage like it was a countdown to failure. 7%. 6. 4.5 hours of standing motionless. 4.5 hours of pain building in my spine, cramping in my calves, numbness spreading through my feet. And for what? To watch my phone die 10 minutes before the evidence I needed started flowing. I searched the technical space desperately, with my hands feeling along the electrical panel in the darkness. There had to be something. Some connection. The utility port. I'd supervised this installation in 2013. The electricians had built a diagnostic port into the panel for system updates. A standard USB connection they'd used exactly twice in 12 years and then forgotten about. My hands were shaking as I pulled my phone charging cable from my pocket, the one I always carried habit from years of business travel. I felt along the panel until I found the small rectangular port plugged in the cable connected my phone. The screen lit up with the charging symbol. 8%, 9%, 10%. The charge was slow. The utility port only provided minimal current, but it was enough. I had power. I had position. I had 4.5 hours of pain in my legs and back, and I was about to have answers. I leaned against the panel, feeling the warmth seep through my shirt, and let myself remember. Helen in this bedroom when she was healthy, laughing at something I'd said, the morning light catching in her hair. Baby Celeste sleeping in the crib against the far wall, tiny fists curled near her face. Building this house brick by brick, watching contractors install every system, approving every detail. Never imagining I'd stand hidden in its walls recording my own daughter's conspiracy. At exactly 10 o'clock, the deadbolt clicked. Loud. Final. 3 feet away from where I stood. This time I wasn't downstairs, listening through walls. This time I was right here in the same room, separated only by a bookshelf and 50 centimeters of darkness. I pressed the record button on my phone. The red indicator light glowed softly in the blackness. Celeste's footsteps crossed the room. I heard her sit on the bed, heard the soft sound of her laptop opening. Normal nighttime routine. Nothing unusual. Then she stood up, footsteps toward the closet. I pressed my eye to the tiny gap between the bookshelf and the wall, a crack barely wide enough to see through, invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. Celeste reached into the wardrobe, pulling out a garment. She held it up to the light. Recognition hit me like a physical blow to the chest. Turquoise. That exact shade of turquoise. Distinctive lace collar. The same dress Helen wore in our wedding photograph, the one hanging on the living room wall downstairs. The dress I thought was lost or donated when Helen died 7 years ago. Before I show you what happened next, comment A, if you think I should have stopped watching, or B, if you'd need to see this through. Please note what follows contains recreated details for narrative purposes, capturing the emotional reality of that moment. If you prefer strictly factual content, you can pause here. Celeste pulled the dress over her head. Slowly. Deliberately. She reached behind her back, zipped it up, smoothed the fabric over her hips. She walked to the full-length mirror and stood there looking at her reflection. Her face shifted. The expression changed into something I didn't recognize. Not my daughter's face anymore. Someone else. Someone wearing her skin and my dead wife's dress. I pressed my hand over my mouth, hard enough to hurt, preventing any sound from escaping. Horror paralyzed me as the stranger in the mirror smiled a satisfied, triumphant smile that had nothing to do with the Celeste I'd raised. She turned, slightly examining herself from different angles, ran her hands down the turquoise fabric, touched the lace collar the same way Helen used to. I didn't know who was standing in that mirror. I only knew it wasn't my daughter and it was wearing my wife's dress. My phone was recording everything. The dress, the transformation, the way she looked at herself like she'd just won something I didn't know we were fighting over. She stood there for 3 full minutes, just looking at her reflection, wearing Helen's wedding dress in the bedroom where Helen had died 7 years ago. Then she smiled again, that same strange, satisfied smile, and walked back to the closet. She took off the dress, carefully hung it back in the wardrobe, closed the door, put on her normal pajamas, sat back down at the laptop, and opened a video call. A man's face appeared on the screen. The video connection opened with a soft chime. The man's face filled her laptop screen at 10:17, and the first words out of his mouth were, "Has he left yet?" In a voice so cold, I knew immediately this wasn't a love affair. "Yes," Celeste said. "He's working late. We have until morning." I pressed closer to the crack in the bookshelf, my phone recording, trying to see the man's face clearly. 45, maybe. Dark hair graying at the temples. Calculating eyes. "Are we clear for the night?" he asked. "We're clear," Celeste confirmed. "He won't be back until after midnight." I was noting every detail when my eyes caught something behind him. A wall. A logo. Garrison Manufacturing. The distinctive blue and silver design I'd commissioned 15 years ago. This man was sitting in my company office, right now. My eyes dropped to the corner of Celeste's bedroom, where a small safe sat below the wardrobe. Lorraine's numbers. 17428. Safe combination. That's what they were. Lorraine had seen what was inside. He was in my building, in my office, sitting at my desk, while blackmailing my daughter into destroying me. "The transfers are still on schedule?" the man asked. "Yes," Celeste said. "Everything's proceeding exactly as we discussed." "Good, because we're past the point of backing out now, Celeste." Her voice was tight. "I understand. This wasn't flirtation. This wasn't partnership. This was something else entirely." "You remember our agreement?" the man continued. "The California documentation stays buried as long as you deliver exactly what we discussed. Every transfer, every timeline, no deviation." Celeste's shoulders tensed. "I know. I'm doing everything you said. The transfers are complete. The medical records are filed." "Good," he said. "Because one call to the SEC and you're looking at federal prison. 3 to 5 years minimum for what you did. CC Federal Prison, California." I stood very still, processing. "The insider trading happened 3 years ago," he said. "You used confidential client information to make trades through your personal account. We have complete documentation, transaction logs, email records, witnesses." "I made a mistake," Celeste said, her voice breaking. "Not with love, with fear. I was young. I didn't think—" "You didn't think you'd get caught," he finished. "But you did. And now you're mine until this is finished." My daughter wasn't in love with her co-conspirator. She was being blackmailed by him. I watched Celeste's body language through the crack. Her responses weren't romantic. They were compliance. Fearful. The tone of someone trapped in following orders. "Desmond," she said quietly, "I've done everything you asked. The vitamins, the medical appointments, the transfers. Everything. Desmond." The name attached to the face. Desmond Harrington, a name and face I wouldn't learn until months later when his records appeared in court documents, 45 years old, operating from my own company office, using illegally granted access appearing on my daughter's laptop screen, with the cold, transactional tone of someone holding all the leverage. "And you'll keep doing it," Desmond said, "until the guardianship is filed and I have access to the remaining assets. That's the deal, Celeste. Your freedom for his company. Guardianship. They were planning to declare me incompetent. The vitamins, the cognitive fog, the medical records. All of it leading to a legal declaration that I couldn't manage my own affairs. I know the deal," Celeste said, exhaustion in her voice. I wish there was another way." "There isn't," Desmond said flatly. "You made a choice 3 years ago when you broke the law. And you made another choice when you came to me instead of going to your father for help. So now you finish what we started." Those words hit me like a punch. She could have come to me 3 years ago when she made the California mistake. She could have confessed, asked for help. I would have hired the best lawyers, protected her. Instead, she'd gone to a blackmailer. And when he'd demanded my company as the price for her silence, she'd agreed. My daughter was being blackmailed, and she chose to sacrifice me instead of trusting me. I don't know which truth was harder to hold. "The timeline is 6 weeks," Desmond continued. "By early August, the medical documentation will be sufficient for a guardianship filing. Given your records from Dr. Thornton, the medication evidence, the confusion you've been displaying, they'll grant it. Given your records from Dr. Thornton, the medication evidence, the confusion you've been displaying, they'll grant it." "And then what?" Celeste asked. "Then you're his legal guardian," Desmond said. "You control everything. The remaining 60% of the company, the house, all assets. You sign over another 20% to the shell company, that's my fee. The rest is yours. 20% more. On top of the 40% they'd already stolen. What about him?" Celeste's voice was small. "What happens to my father? He lives out his days thinking he's suffering from early dementia," Desmond said with chilling casualness. "Comfortable, cared for, completely unaware that his own daughter orchestrated his decline. It's actually quite humane when you think about it." I stood in the darkness behind the bookshelf, my phone recording every word, my body screaming, from 5 hours of standing motionless, and I understood the full picture. Celeste had committed insider trading in California 3 years ago. Desmond had documentation. He was using it to blackmail her into destroying me financially and legally. And she had chosen to comply rather than confess and ask for help. She was a victim of her own past crime, of Desmond's blackmail, of the impossible choice between prison and patricide. But she was also choosing this. Every day, every vitamin pill, every forged signature, every lie. They weren't finished. At 11:43, they started discussing the guardianship timeline, and I learned I had exactly 6 weeks before my daughter would have me declared incompetent and take legal control of everything I'd built in 68 years. "The transfers are complete," Desmond said, his face still filling Celeste's laptop screen from my office at Garrison Manufacturing. 47 transactions over 3 months. 10 million total under Brent's name in California. Clean. My legs were screaming. I'd been standing motionless for over 6 hours. But I couldn't move. Not now. Not when they were laying out the entire plan. "And the guardianship petition?" Celeste asked. "When do we file?" "August," Desmond said. 2 months from now. The medication records show progressive cognitive decline. Thornton's psychological evaluation documents controlling behavior patterns. Combined, it's textbook incompetence. "Walk me through it again," Celeste said, and I could hear exhaustion in her voice. "I need to be sure." "You file the petition in Franklin County Court," Desmond explained with the patience of someone who'd explained this many times. "You submit the medical evidence, Dr. Henley's records showing confusion, Dr. Thornton's psych eval, the documentation of medication side effects. You request emergency temporary guardianship based on immediate risk to his health and assets. And the court grants it. They grant it, Desmond confirmed. Given the evidence, they have no choice. Your father appears to be suffering cognitive decline. You're his only family. You're the obvious guardian. And then I control everything, Celeste said quietly. All the remaining assets, all the decisions, everything. Desmond agreed. Where he lives, what medical care he receives, who he can see, what he can spend. You become his legal decision-maker for all purposes. He retains no rights. No rights. I would retain no rights over my own life. 6 weeks, 42 days, 1,008 hours. That's how long I had before they erased me. And I was holding 3 hours and 17 minutes that would save me. What about the remaining shares? Celeste asked. Once you're guardian, you have legal authority to manage his assets, Desmond said. You can approve any business transaction you deem necessary, including signing over another 20% to our shell company as agreed. Your fee, Celeste said. My fee for keeping California buried, Desmond corrected. And for the risk I've taken. And for sitting in this office right now at midnight accessing systems I shouldn't be able to access. I checked my phone in the darkness. 3 hours, 17 minutes of recording. Battery at 47% and still charging from the electrical panel's utility port. Every word documented. Every detail captured. The timeline is critical, Desmond continued. We file in early August. Court reviews within 2 weeks. Temporary guardianship granted by mid-August. Permanent guardianship hearing scheduled for September. By October, this is finished. Your father lives comfortably in a care facility. You're free of California consequences, and I have compensation for the leverage I've provided. A care facility. They were planning to put me in a home. He'll never know, Celeste said, and there was something in her voice, guilt, grief. He'll think it's just dementia, natural aging. He'll never know I did this to him. That's the humane part, Desmond said. He gets to keep his dignity. In his mind, he's just an old man whose body and brain are failing. Better than knowing the truth. I stood in the darkness behind my bedroom bookshelf, recording my daughter and her blackmailer planning my erasure, and I understood the complete picture. They'd stolen 40% of my company. They'd poisoned me for months. They'd built false medical records. They'd planned my legal incompetence. And in 6 weeks, they'd strip me of every right, every asset, every choice, and put me in a facility where I'd live out my days thinking I'd simply grown old and confused. But I had 3 hours and 17 minutes that told a different story. The conversation continued past midnight. Details about court procedures, backup plans if the judge asked questions, coordination with Dr. Thornton, transfer timelines for the remaining shares. At 1 o'clock, Desmond finally signed off. Remember, he said before disconnecting. 6 weeks. Stay the course. Don't deviate. Don't get sentimental. Finish what we started. I will, Celeste said. The screen went dark. Celeste sat on the edge of the bed for a long moment, her head in her hands. Then she stood up, changed into her pajamas, and got into bed. I waited, counting breaths, watching through the crack as her breathing gradually slowed and deepened. By 2 o'clock, she was in deep sleep, the rhythm steady and unmistakable. I began to move. Centimeter by centimeter, I eased myself out of the 50-centimeter gap between bookshelf and wall. I knew every floorboard in this house. I'd supervised the installation 30 years ago. I knew which ones creaked and which ones held silent under weight. I stepped on the silent ones, reached the bedroom door, slipped into the hallway, started down the stairs. Footsteps behind me. Fast. Celeste waking. I had 1 second to decide. I closed my eyes, let my arms hang loose at my sides, kept walking down the stairs in a slow, steady, dreaming rhythm. Father, Celeste's voice from the top of the stairs. Dad, are you awake? I didn't answer. Didn't pause. Didn't open my eyes. Just kept walking toward the living room with the same slack expression and measured pace I'd watched her perform in February. She taught me how to sleepwalk to protect her secret. I used that lesson to escape with her confession. Sometimes the trap turns on the trapper. "Dad," she called again. I walked into the living room, stood there eyes closed, swaying slightly. Long silence from upstairs. Then a sigh, audible even from the bottom of the stairs. Footsteps returning to the bedroom. The deadbolt clicking into place. She'd bought it. She thought I was sleepwalking. The same performance she'd staged in February to make me stop questioning. The lock had just saved me from discovery with 3 hours and 17 minutes of recorded evidence in my phone. I grabbed my briefcase and my keys and walked out the front door at 2:30 in the morning like a man who'd just remembered an urgent errand. The hotel room key card beeped green at 2:47, and I realized I was shaking so badly I could barely turn the handle, not from fear, but from the weight of what I'd just captured in my own home. I'd chosen a hotel downtown, anonymous, the kind of place where business travelers checked in at odd hours and nobody asked questions. I paid with my personal credit card, gave a fake reason about early morning meetings, and took the elevator to the 3rd floor with my phone clutched in my hand like it might vanish. Inside the room, I locked the door, put the chain on, and sat at the small desk with my laptop. 3 hours and 17 minutes of audio. My daughter's voice. Desmond's voice. Every detail of their conspiracy. Every threat. Every plan. Every timeline. I pulled an external hard drive from my briefcase, the one I kept for important company backups, and plugged it into my laptop. Started the transfer. Watched the progress bar crawl across the screen, blue pixels advancing in tiny increments. Then I opened my email, created an encrypted message to Lawrence, and attached the file. Subject line, evidence. 3 hours, 17 minutes. Call me. Sent. Then cloud storage. I uploaded the file to 3 different services, creating redundant backups in case anything went wrong. The final upload completed at 3:15. Recording successfully uploaded, the confirmation message read, and I stared at those 3 words until they blurred. 3 backups. 3 copies of her voice. 3 versions of the moment I lost my daughter. External drive. Cloud storage. Lawrence's encrypted server. Redundancy in case of... In case of what? In case she is still my daughter somewhere underneath. In case I am wrong about the voice on that recording. But I wasn't wrong. I sat in that hotel room, with the blue glow of the laptop screen washing over me, and the adrenaline that had been holding me together for 8 hours suddenly drained away like water from a broken dam. My daughter was gone, not dead. Worse. Transformed into someone I didn't recognize. Someone who could poison her father, forge his signature, steal his company plan, his legal erasure, and sleep soundly afterward. I'd raised her alone after Helen died. I'd taught her to ride a bike, helped her with homework, paid for college, celebrated her promotions, welcomed her home when she said she was lonely in California. And somewhere along the way, that little girl had become someone who could look me in the eye and hand me pills designed to make me confused and compliant. "She's gone," I whispered to the empty hotel room. "My daughter is gone." For the first time in months, I cried. Not from fear, not from anger, from grief. From the devastating realization that I was mourning someone who was still breathing, still living in my house, still calling me Dad. I don't know how long I sat there. Long enough for the hotel coffee to grow cold in the cup I'd poured without drinking. Long enough for the sky outside to start shifting from black to deep blue. My phone vibrated at 6:20. "Lawrence, I got your email," he said without preamble. "Where are you?" "Hotel, downtown. Can you come to my office now?" "Yes. Bring the original recording. Everything." "Eugene." His voice was tight with something I couldn't identify. "If this is what I think it is, we move this morning. Today. No delays. I met Lawrence at Prescott and Associates at 7:15. He was already there, coffee brewing conference room set up with recording equipment and legal pads. He listened to the first hour without speaking, removed his reading glasses, looked at me. "Eugene," he said, "this is the best evidence I've seen in 30 years of practice." We listened to all 3 hours and 17 minutes. Lawrence took notes, stopped the playback occasionally to confirm details, made me replay certain sections. Desmond discussing the California insider trading leverage. Celeste confirming the vitamin poisoning. The guardianship timeline. The shell company transfers. The 47 transactions. The August filing date. The care facility plan. By 10 o'clock, Lawrence was drafting documents. "Criminal complaint with the Ohio State Economic Crimes Investigation Division," he said, typing. "Wire fraud, elder abuse, forgery, organized economic crime, and emergency temporary restraining order to freeze all accounts and assets." "How long until it takes effect?" I asked. "The court will review the TRO within 48 to 72 hours, Lawrence explained. "Once granted, all accounts freeze immediately. But until then I go home and have dinner with her like nothing happened," I finished. "Like I don't know she's planning to destroy me Monday morning." Lawrence looked at me steadily. "Can you do that 3 days of normal while this processes?" Wednesday, 9:47 a.m. TRO filed. Thursday, court review begins. Friday, possible approval. Saturday to Sunday. Celeste's planned girls' weekend in San Francisco. Monday, 9 a.m. Desmond's wire transfer. Monday, 9:01 a.m. accounts frozen. Maybe. "I can do it," I said. Lawrence notarized the documents, filed them electronically with the court, sent copies to the Economic Crimes Division, created a case file with my name on the tab. "This stays completely confidential," he said. "No one knows except you, me, and the investigating officers. Celeste cannot find out. If she discovers the TRO before the accounts freeze, everything disappears," I said. "I know." He handed me the filing receipts, printed copies for my records. "You've just started a war," he said quietly, "against your own daughter. Are you ready for what comes next?" I thought about the recording, about Celeste's voice explaining how they'd erase me from my own life, about Desmond's cold calculation, about the 6 weeks I'd had before they would have declared me incompetent. "I'm ready," I said. I drove home with the TRO filing receipt in my briefcase and a dinner reservation confirmation from Celeste on my phone. "Looking forward to catching up tonight, Dad," her text read. "I feel like we haven't really talked in weeks." The court had 72 hours to freeze the accounts. Celeste had 4 days until her planned Monday morning transfer. And I had 6 hours to figure out how to sit across a dinner table from my daughter and pretend I didn't know she was planning to destroy me. "Your salmon is perfect, Dad," Celeste said across the Wednesday dinner table. And I realized the hardest part wasn't pretending I didn't know it was pretending I still cared. She smiled that same smile she'd given me for 39 years. The same smile she'd worn while draining my accounts. The same smile she'd probably practiced in Helen's mirror while my wife's body cooled in the August heat. "Thank you, sweetheart," I said, cutting another piece. The salmon tasted like cardboard. Everything did now. Thursday morning, she arrived at the office at 8:15 a.m. sharp. "Morning, Dad," she called through my open-door, coffee in hand, wearing that cream blazer Helen had helped her pick out last spring. I watched her settle at her desk, watched her review the quarterly reports I'd left for her, watched her perform the role of devoted daughter with the precision of someone who'd been performing it for decades. Around 9, Thane knocked on my open door, a folder in his hand. "The latest monitoring report," he said carefully. "I thought you might want—" "Leave it," I said, not looking up from the spreadsheet I'd been staring at for 20 minutes without seeing. He hesitated. "Are you—" "I'm fine." I wasn't fine. I was maintaining. There's a difference. Friday crawled past with the speed of geological time. Celeste brought lunch to my office turkey sandwich, no mayo, exactly how I liked it. She sat across from me discussing the Portland expansion like we were still the team we'd pretended to be, like she hadn't stolen $10 million, like she hadn't conspired to erase everything my wife and I spent our lives building. Something flickered across her face. Suspicion, concern, fear, of course, she said finally. Whatever you think is best. My phone buzzed at 8:47 a.m. Encrypted message from Lawrence, TRO signed. Execute Monday 9 a.m. Stay the course. I deleted it and went back to pretending. The weekend was theater. Saturday morning coffee. Sunday farmer's market. Normal father-daughter routines performed by two people who'd stopped being father and daughter somewhere along the way, though only one of us knew it yet. You seem distant, Celeste said Sunday afternoon, arranging flowers in Helen's favorite vase, a cruelty so casual I almost admired it. Just tired, I said. Maybe you should take some time off, after everything with Mom. I'm fine, that phrase again. My mantra, my lie. Monday morning I arrived at the office at 6:30 a.m. The building was empty, the silence broken only by the hum of HVAC and the occasional ping of my computer booting up. I sat in the dark watching the sky lighten over downtown Columbus, watching the city wake up, watching the minutes count down to 9 a.m. At 8:55 a.m. Lawrence called. It's happening. I know. You okay? Does it matter? He was quiet for a moment. I'll be there in 30 minutes. At exactly 9 a.m. Somewhere in a bank's secure server room, lines of code executed. Accounts froze. Access revoked. $10 million locked down with the clinical efficiency of modern finance. I imagined Celeste at her desk, coffee in hand, opening her banking app for her morning check. I imagined her face when the error message appeared. I imagined the moment she realized what was happening. I didn't have to imagine long. My phone lit up at 9:07 a.m. Celeste calling. I let it ring through to voicemail. 9:12 a.m. Another call. Voicemail. 9:15 a.m. Another. By 9:30 a.m. she'd called 6 times. Lawrence arrived at 9:45 a.m. with 2 banker's boxes and a laptop. Detective Morrison's running the warrant now, he said, spreading files across my conference table. They'll have her phone records, bank records, everything within the hour. My phone buzzed again. Call 7. You going to answer that? Lawrence asked. I placed the phone face down on my desk. No. The calls kept coming, every few minutes, regular as clockwork, desperate as a drowning person reaching for air. By 11:30 a.m. I had 17 missed calls. My phone lit up again at 11:47 a.m. Call 18. Celeste's name bright on the screen, her contact photo smiling up at me. That picture from her 35th birthday, Helen's arm around her shoulders, both of them laughing at something I'd said. I watched it ring, once, twice, 3 times. Then I placed the phone face down on my desk and looked at Lawrence. Continue reading from page 12, I said. My phone buzzed against the wood, vibrating with the weight of everything that was ending. Lawrence read page 12 in the same measured tone he'd used for the previous 11 pages, reciting Detective Morrison's evidence summary while my phone vibrated against the desk. Call 18, 19, 20. By the time he finished, Celeste had called 23 times. I hadn't answered once. 2 weeks later, Keith Mercer spread 11 pages of system logs across Lawrence's conference table. 3 weeks of digital forensics, he said. Your daughter left a trail a first year could follow. He walked me through it methodically. Access card 417-C issued to Celeste, used to clone a badge for Desmond, 13 minutes before the night she'd told me she was working late in California. The signal jammer, Chinese military surplus frequency, matched to domestic cell networks, deliberately sparing the landline. 6 months of confidential board documents photographed on her office phone between 10 and midnight, uploaded to a cloud account registered to her backup email. Thane's 47 transaction records. 3 hours and 17 minutes of recorded conspiracy. 5 independent evidence types. No jury on earth acquits against that. The arrogance, Keith said quietly. She never imagined you'd look. That was the part that cut deepest. Not the theft. Not the poisoning. That she'd been so certain I wouldn't fight back. Judge Ruth Sinclair heard Celeste's wiretapping motion on a Thursday morning in September. Her attorney argued reasonable expectation of privacy. Lawrence countered that a homeowner retains full authority over every corner of his own residence, including a 50-centimeter technical space behind a bookshelf he'd commissioned himself. Sinclair listened to both sides without expression, reviewed her notes, and looked up. The recording is admissible. Celeste sat stone-faced beside her attorney and never looked at me. Not when the motion failed. Not when Lawrence presented the access logs. Not once during the entire 90 minutes. October arrived gray and cold. Lawrence called on a Tuesday morning. "They're offering a deal," he said. "Guilty plea to state-level organized fraud. Full cooperation against Desmond and Brent. Suspended sentence, no prison time. Complete restitution and 5 years probation. And if we refuse, criminal trial. She loses. Federal sentencing guidelines put her at 28 months minimum." I stared out the window at downtown Columbus. The skyline Helen had loved. The company we'd spent 40 years building together. "I don't want her in prison," I said. Lawrence was quiet. "You're certain?" "No," I said, "but do it anyway." I signed the authorization that same afternoon, sitting in the chair where I'd listened to Keith catalog every digital fingerprint my daughter had left behind. She would plead guilty, pay back what she'd taken, and spend 5 years on probation. No handcuffs, no cell, no orange jumpsuit. I don't know what to call what I felt when I signed those papers. Not forgiveness, it was too early for that, and I wasn't sure forgiveness was mine to give. Not mercy, exactly. Maybe just the honest admission that I could build a case strong enough to send my daughter away, and I still didn't want to. Some lines once crossed cannot be uncrossed, but some doors I decided should be left open anyway. The civil trial began the same week the criminal case closed. Celeste's attorney opened by invoking Helen's memory, a mother's natural wish to provide for her daughter, the unfairness of a will that named only a husband. He spoke about family legacy, about intentions that predated any wrongdoing. Lawrence let him finish. Then he stood and crossed to the bench with a single sealed folder. "Probate court file 2018-CV-4426, he said. "The original will of Helen Marie Garrison." Judge Sinclair broke the seal and read in silence. Her expression didn't change, but something shifted in the way she held the document carefully. The way you hold something that matters. She read one passage aloud. "I, Helen Marie Garrison, being of sound mind, do hereby bequeath all property, assets, and holdings to my husband, Eugene David Garrison, with full and unconditional control." Then the handwritten addendum initialed in the margin blue fountain pen, the Mont Blanc I'd given her for our 20th anniversary. "Because I know he will always do the right thing." The courtroom held its breath for a moment. I stared at the back of the chair in front of me. 7 years. She'd written those words 7 years before any of this happened. She couldn't have known the specifics, the deadbolt, the vitamins, the recording. But she'd known enough to write that sentence and seal it in a probate file where it would wait quietly until it was needed. Judge Sinclair set the document down. The stock transfer was voided. Every forged signature invalidated. All misappropriated assets ordered returned. Dr. Thornton's certificate stricken from the record. California authorities notified Desmond Harrington and Brent Holloway. Judgment for the plaintiff on all counts. I'd won everything. I sat in that courtroom and felt nothing except the particular weight of being loved by someone who was no longer there to see it. The reporters were gone by the time I reached the courthouse steps. Lawrence had already said his goodbyes. The parking lot was nearly empty. She was standing beside a silver Honda. I didn't recognize her, back to me, keys in her hand. I should have kept walking. My car was 40 feet to the left. I had nothing left to say and no reason to cross that asphalt. I crossed it anyway. She heard my footsteps and turned. For a moment, neither of us spoke. She looked smaller than I'd ever seen her, not physically, but in some other way, like the performance had finally stopped, and what remained was just a 39-year-old woman who had run out of explanations. "Dad," she began. "Don't apologize," I said. "Not here." She closed her mouth, nodded once the way a person nods when they understand they've forfeited the right to certain words. I looked at her eyes. Helen's eyes, exactly the same gray-green I'd watched close for the last time 7 years ago in a hospital bed. Celeste had inherited them without inheriting whatever had kept Helen honest. I didn't say that. I didn't say anything else. What I felt standing there wasn't anger. The anger had burned out somewhere between the hotel room and the courtroom. What remained was quieter and harder to name grief, maybe, or simply the recognition that some losses don't resolve. They just become part of the landscape you carry. She turned back to her car. I stood and watched her go, the reverse lights, the slow arc toward the exit, the taillights shrinking on Mound Street until they disappeared. Then I walked to my own car, sat behind the wheel for a long moment, and drove home. The first snow of December was still falling outside when Lawrence slid the final documents across his desk and said, "It's done." The appeals court had upheld everything. 40% of shares returned. Hidden accounts revoked. My name removed from every fraudulent record. Desmond and Brent had pled guilty in California federal court that same morning. Wire fraud, interstate conspiracy, 8 to 12 years each. Lawrence shook my hand. I drove home through quiet streets, watching snow settle on rooftops, and said nothing to anyone. Christmas morning, a courier delivered an envelope with Lawrence's firm logo in the corner. Inside was a single page of cream stationery I recognized immediately, Helen's personal letterhead. A handwritten note from Lawrence said, "Only found with the probate file. Never opened. LP." I sat at my desk and read it once. Then again. Helen had known. Not suspected known. She'd seen Celeste's ambition harden into entitlement years before I did, had watched the small lies compound into something she couldn't name to me without being dismissed. So she'd stayed silent and protected me the only way she could, through the will, through the courts, through a letter she'd sealed and left for a moment she hoped would never come. "You will read this when you need to," she had written. "I love you." No period. As if she had simply run out of time. New Year's Eve. I walked upstairs before midnight and stopped at the bedroom door. No deadbolt anymore, just the original brass knob and a small dent in the frame where the lock had been. I pressed my thumb into the indentation once. Then I walked through, left the door open behind me, and went to bed. And to you listening to my story, remember this: sometimes the people closest to us are the ones we need to watch most carefully. Looking back, I made mistakes. I trusted without verifying. I loved without boundaries. I thought being a good father meant never questioning my daughter's intentions. When Helen wrote that will 7 years ago, she saw what I refused to see. I was so busy being proud of Celeste that I missed every warning sign. Don't make my mistake, trust, but protect yourself too. The lesson I learned from these family stories revenge taught me is this: doing the right thing doesn't always feel victorious. I won every legal battle but lost my daughter. I recovered my assets but couldn't recover our relationship. God put me through this to teach me that mercy and justice can coexist. That protecting yourself doesn't make you cruel. That family stories' revenge aren't about winning. They're about surviving with integrity intact. Sometimes the hardest part of family stories' revenge is realizing the person you're really fighting for is yourself. So I want to hear from you. What would you have done in my position? Would you have accepted the plea deal or pushed for prison time? Drop your thoughts in the comments. If this story resonated with you, please share it. And if you want more stories like this, subscribe to Dad Family Revenge. Thank you for staying until the very end. Your time means everything to me. One final note. While this story is based on real experiences, certain details have been fictionalized for privacy and storytelling. The lesson, however, is entirely real.